Army. The T-70 light tank was used by the Soviet Red Army during World War II, designed to replace the reconnaissance role of the T-60 and the infantry support function of the T-50. It had two variants. One was the T-80 light tank, a more advanced variant of the T-70 with a two-man turret, but only a limited number were produced before the Soviet Union abandoned light tanks. The other variant was the T-90 self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, which combined the T-70 chassis with a dual machine gun mount. The T-70 was equipped with a 45mm 38 Type L/46 tank gun and carried 45 rounds of ammunition, as well as a 7.62mm coaxial DT heavy machine gun. The tank had a crew of two, a driver and a commander, who also served as the loader and gunner. The frontal armor of the turret was 60mm thick, with 45mm armor on the front and sides of the hull, 35mm on the rear of the hull and sides of the turret, and 10mm on the top of the turret and the hull. By 1942, light tanks were considered useless weapons by the Red Army, as they could not match the performance of the T-34 medium tank, and their armaments were insufficient to harm most German tanks. However, they could be produced in small factories that could not handle heavy and medium tank production. The T-70 was a replacement for the flawed T-60 reconnaissance tank, which had poor mobility, weak armor, and inadequate firepower with its 20mm cannon. The T-70 also replaced the T-50 light infantry tank, which had a very short production time but suffered from complex design and high production costs. The T-70 tank was developed by a design team led by Nicholas Ostrov at Factory No. 38 in Kirov. The first batch of T-70 tanks was equipped with two GAZ-202 automotive engines, positioned on either side of the hull, each controlling one side of the tracks. This was considered a serious issue, and it was concluded even before the tanks were issued to the troops. Soon, the Design Bureau redesigned a new version, the T-70M, although it continued to be referred to as the T-70, which had its two engines connected coaxially and placed on the right side of the hull, along with a standard transmission and differential gears. Its conical turret was replaced with a simpler all-welded turret, which was moved to the left side of the hull. Interestingly, after the production line of the T-70 was redesigned, the Su-76 also began producing a similarly unsatisfactory asynchronous twin-engine design, which was later redesigned and named the Su-76M. The T-70 started production at Factory No. 37 in March 1942, alongside the Gorky Automobile Plant, GAZ, producing the T-60 in Factory No. 38. By September 1942, the T-70 had completely replaced the T-60 in production, although the T-60 continued to be used until the end of the war. The production of the T-70 continued until October 1943, with a total of 8,226 units completed. In April 1942, the conical turret of the early version of the T-70 was replaced with a new fully welded turret. The final version of the T-70 featured two GAZ-203 engines with 85 horsepower each, a periscope for the tank commander, replacing the original narrow slit, along with several other improvements. Based on actual combat experience, the Soviet Army found it almost impossible for single-turret Soviet light tanks to coordinate the combat of an entire tank platoon. The reason is that the tank commander has an excessive workload and is too busy, having to search for targets, load shells, command the driver, and operate the main gun and machine gun. The role of infantry tanks was also considered outdated, and the Su-76 self-propelled gun was deemed more suitable for supporting infantry tasks, as its 76.2mm gun could fire large high-explosive shells. The Su-76 could also be produced using the chassis of a light tank, effectively utilizing resources. To compensate for their shortcomings, the Design Bureau created a more advanced T-80 light tank, which features a two-man turret that is much larger than that of the T-70. However, the armored vehicles provided under the Lend-Lease Act were far more suitable for reconnaissance and liaison tasks than light tanks. Therefore, all production of light tanks was cancelled in October 1943, with only 120 T-80s produced. After that, the Soviet Army did not develop any more light tanks during the war. In November 1943, the Soviet Red Army tank units were reorganized, the light tanks were replaced by the T-34 and the new T-34-85, which began production a month later, while light tanks were repurposed for self-propelled artillery and other units. The Soviet Army later began developing amphibious light tanks in 1945, leading to the introduction of the PT-76 amphibious tank in 1954. The Soviet Union lacked self-propelled air defense systems at the beginning of World War II. The first formal air defense vehicle developed was in 1942, which mounted a dual 12.7mm DSHK heavy machine gun turret with an optical sight on the T-60 tank. At the same time, the T-70 was also adopted as the basis for the development of the T-90 self-propelled anti-aircraft gun project. However, this plan was cancelled in 1943, and it was replaced by the ZSU-37 self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, which was equipped with the 1939 model 61K 37mm anti-aircraft gun, using the chassis of the Su-76 assault gun.